Rump roast has the biggest potential to be tender and juicy. So if you're wondering how to cook it, stay tuned. Maybe you just got half a cow of meat and you've got this roast and you're wondering, how do I cook with this? Or you picked up a roast at the grocery store and you have no idea how to cook this without getting it dry. Well, let me help you. But before we get into the how-to, let me tell you about dry roasting. Dry roasting is cooking in the oven without a lid on and without any extra added liquid, as opposed to adding a lid on and or adding liquid. And no one likes dry meat, so you are going to be cooking your rump roast with dry roasting. And there's really only 5 key components, and the main idea is that you don't want to overcook your roast at too high a temperature. And there's a way to lock those juices in and keep it cooking just enough so you have a tender, delicious roast. Now, not included in my steps, because you've already done this, is pick the right cut. You are probably at this video because you have a rump roast, so you've already done step number 1 in a way by picking the right cut of roast, which, like I said before, this is the one that is the biggest contender for a delicious, juicy, flavorful, and tender roast. The next part is also not included in my steps because we don't do this, but you could cut off any excess fat and maybe take out the bone or trim it out. We actually love the flavor of the fat, and I don't have a rump with a bone in, and if you did, it is called a standing rump roast. So like I said, we are skipping cutting out the fat or cutting out the bone, but you may do this if you choose to. And just for your information, not all rump roasts have a bone in it, so you may just not have a bone. Now here starts your steps if you are taking notes, and they conveniently all start with an S. So number 1, salting. You want to start by salting your rump roast. You can do this anywhere between maybe 6 to 24 hours before you're going to be cooking your roast. In fact, I once read a book about cooking various kinds of cuts of meat, and they would talk about salting their meat for up to a week before cooking, which sounds kind of bizarre, but there must be something about it because we experimented and followed their steps, and I gotta say, the meat that I salted for a long time was so tender. So there's gotta be something to the science of letting the salt over time tenderize your meat before you cook it. In any case, I am saying 6 to 24 hours before you're gonna cook it because most likely you found this video because you wanna eat your roast tonight or tomorrow. And so it's totally possible with just a little bit of salting, if you can, obviously as long as possible before you're going to be cooking it, but 6 to 24 hours is plenty to have a delicious roast. The other key thing to note is that you want to use kosher salt or a really high quality salt. Step number 2 is sear. Sear your meat on a high heat. Whether you're going to do this in your oven at 500 degrees Fahrenheit or like we do it in a pan, ideally you want to do this in the actual pan or pot that you are going to be using in the oven. Just makes it a little bit easier if you can do that. So I'm going to be doing it in my cast iron pot. And like I mentioned, the idea is that we want to get our roast up to temperature in the oven without overcooking it. And so what this is going to do is create a nice crust layer around the roast so that when it's cooking in the oven, it's sort of helping trap in that heat and help the internal temperature of the meat come to the right temperature without it all kind of escaping outside on the outside layers. So it holds it all in, and then it's also a delicious flavor addition for your meat. Step number 3 is to slowly roast your meat in the oven. I mean slowly because you are going to be putting the temperature low, super low. Lower than any recipe you're reading, lower than anything you've read in a book, unless you've read 230, 40, maybe 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So super low. This is so important because, again, we are trying not to rush the meat by overheating it. And so by having this super slow heat happening to this meat, you are helping the inside of this roast come to temperature without overcooking. If you go any higher than 250 degrees Fahrenheit, you're just at a high risk of drying out this meat, and well, that's exactly what we're trying to avoid here. So Low, low, low. How I know that my meat has come up to temperature is if I stick a thermometer into the center of the meat. So watch out that you're not sticking it too far down. You really want to kind of be aiming for the center point of this meat. And take a reading for about 145 degrees Fahrenheit. That'll take you to a medium rare roast. Number 4 is set. When your meat is up to temperature and you take it out of the oven, you want to let it set on your counter for about 20 minutes. This is so important because all the juices that have sort of seeped out during the cooking process now needs this time to soak back in as the meat kind of relaxes and settles without that external heat that it had in the oven. This is so important. Don't skip this step. Don't cut too soon because all that steam and juiciness will just seep right out and be wasted. And this is also part of keeping that meat nice and juicy. So let your meat set, do not cut it, do not eat it, wait. And if you're gonna be feeding this to company, factor this into your time. You wanna leave at least 20, maybe even 30 minutes for this meat to come down to temperature around the internal temperature of 135 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you are ready for cutting and serving. In the end, I can say trust the process. It really makes all the difference. If you're going to be cooking a delicious roast, you may as well follow all of the steps and let the science do what it needs to do. I'm going to include a final FAQ here because there are lots of questions about how to cook roast, how to not cook it dry, what temperature, and so I'm going to address it here. So the biggest question is what temperature? What temperature do I cook this roast at? Again, like I said, low and slow is one of the key components to not getting a dry roast. And so I recommend anywhere around 220, 250 degrees Fahrenheit, in that range. Low and slow is going to be exactly what you need to have a super tender and juicy roast. Now, what is the best cooking method for a rump roast? I think that dry roasting is just the best way to go in this case. Searing the meat on all sides, whether in the oven at a high temperature or in a pan, first, and then letting it cook in the oven without a lid, without any extra liquid, does this roast plenty good. I hope this has been so helpful to you. If you, like me, are dabbling into all kinds of cuts of meat and learning how to cook them, I hope this was a great value to you. And if you like content like this, would you consider subscribing to our channel? I hope to make lots more content like this, and I'll be dabbling into some of the gardening content that I've been planning, which is all about growing as much food as we can here in our small garden so that we can eat as healthy as possible for as cheap as possible. So stay tuned if you're interested in that, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.